everyone. Welcome to Placemaking 101, Shaping the Spaces We Share. I am Maria Furgiuele, the Executive Director of the Community Design Center Rochester, and I'm very pleased to be your host and moderator today. The Community Design Center is a valuable resource available to help all of us weather this storm and build a stronger, more equitable, and resilient community. We look to partner with other organizations and communities and create platforms for collaboration, allowing us to expand our reach and amplify our voice. Placemaking 101 was designed to be a place to share information and have conversations about the strategies and processes that help us to build community through the way we shape our space. We welcome you to this month's presentation, Urban Placemaking Avenues for Engagement. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. If you haven't done this already, please introduce yourself in the chat. We will be keeping the chat function open throughout the presentation, but we do ask you to present all of your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This program is planned to be 90 minutes long, and a recording of this program will be shared with all of our participants. Your feedback is very important to us in helping us to improve our programming. If you are new to this program, please take the survey at the end. Before we start our program, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. Special thanks to Common Ground Health for being our event sponsor today. And we are pleased to be co-hosting this event with Hinge Neighbors and C4. I also want to thank them and Highland Planning for their financial support of the Placemaking 101 program. Also, I'd like to acknowledge Monica Reifenstein, who is the wizard behind the scenes, making everything go smoothly. So now, I'd like to introduce Shawn Dunwoody. He's the co-founder of Hinge Neighbors and an integrative artist, designer, and visual consultant of Dunwoody Visual Consulting, a widely recognized and multidisciplinary creative force for change. He has been integral in many dynamic Rochester projects, including Composers Crossing, and more recently, the transformation of the Martin Luther King Square Park as a community space for expression. Take it away, Shawn.
Oh, thank you so very much, Maria. Those are great words. Thank you. And I want to say welcome to everyone. Glad we're so happy to have you here today. I'm speaking on behalf of Hinge Neighbors to introduce our guests. And Hinge Neighbors is an initiative where we're looking to really bring the voices together and communities together to find those avenues of engagement with the neighbors living on either side of Inner Loop North, so that we can actually create a new, brighter Rochester in the future to come in its possible eventual fill. So our panelists today, we have Eric Frisch. He's a special events, special projects manager with the city of Rochester. He's served also as a transportation specialist. So he has a lot of knowledge on how we get things moving here. And we got Norman Garrick, professor of transportation and urban planning at the University of Connecticut. And he approaches creative ways to actually have engagement and thinking of transportation and people as we move forward. And we have Jim McIntosh, who is a principal at Bergman and Associates. He's been a civil engineer for 30 years. And he actually worked on some of the earlier parts of the Interloop fill that happened. So we got a great panelist. We got a great discussion to happen. So please tune in, have many questions, please, and enjoy the discussion. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone, and or afternoon, actually. And thank you, Shawn. Thanks to the Design Center, C4, and Hinge for organizing this presentation on placemaking and specifically how placemaking is part of both the Interloop East and will be a part of the Interloop North project. As city engineer during the design and construction of the Interloop East, I wanted to provide a little history on how the Interloop came to be. And I thank Eric Frisch for a lot of these slides and what was done and lessons we learned. And I hope that these will help the Interloop North project be as successful as the Interloop East was, and actually raise the bar on even higher community engagement, which we all know is is important to what we're all striving for for anyone who works on the public side. So Interloop East project, just to set it, I think most people know where it is. It's in blue. It's roughly was roughly a third of the Interloop. That if you don't count the section that actually serves as I-490, which is kind of the southern portion of the Interloop, and the west portion. So a little history on how it came to be. Back in 1929, the city did a Bartholomew Street plan on the left, and though you can't read it, that little circle in the center, this was done in 1929, was labeled the Central Traffic District, which I think is an interesting choice of words at the time. And while the shape was similar to the Interloop, the street plan was quite multimodal. Cars really weren't at the forefront in 1929 as they later came to be, and that you see in the traffic plan on the right that was done in 1951. The plan for arterials, which more clearly defines the Interloop. In fact, that old Bartholomew plan is still used today by the city. It really was more of a plan to set the right-of-way width so that you would have room for all modes of transportation, bicycle, pedestrian, sidewalk, cafes, all those kind of things. So then here's what we had before, and this is where I say, yes, I'm Jim McIntosh and I'm an engineer, and start my 12-step program. But as engineers, back in 1940, we took down some places. We kind of reversed placemaking by putting this road through the red section. The section of the Interloop East starts on the right-hand side of the page, and there's that red line that makes its way across, and you can see the neighborhoods there that were taken down, and the street grid that was displaced by the construction of the Interloop. Why did we build it in the first place? Well, the city population peaked in the 1950s at over 330,000. We're about 210,000 now. And this was built in the late 50s, early 60s. There was no thought that that population was going to decrease. The thought was it would better distribute traffic through and around downtown, connect the 490, and when ultimately the I-390 extension and Northern Expressways, which were fortunately never built, that's the one that would have, taken away the South Wedge as we know it. And as part of this Interloop, 149 parcels were raised. I just thought this design was interesting that Eric found in the history and plans for the Interloop. This is on the left is the intersection of Main Street, University. As they planned, it's kind of this crazy roundabout thing. I'm not sure which level is which, but I just thought from a historical perspective, that was, back in 47, the Interloop was finalized in 1964. Obviously, it changed to just a standard bridge, Main Street bridged over the sunken Interloop. And so here's what we had in 2014, as the Interloop, and some of the reasons we knew it had to go away. This is rush hour in 2014, and we're not kidding, this is midday. You can see the traffic up on East Avenue, was pretty good, and even on Pitkin Street and Union Street, which were both one way, but certainly this road was way overbuilt. It was 940T, some of the background, it was a federal aid, which kind of, was a good and bad thing. It helped us get the 17.7 million to repair, but it also limited some of the things we could do. We had to meet, DOT and federal highway criteria. It was 4 to 6 lanes, 2 to 3 lane frontage streets, entrance and exit ramps. There was 12 travel lanes. It was, 355 feet wide, a football field, more than. And the traffic numbers, this is the geeky part, the AADT, which is the average, daily traffic. At the north end, 7,000, at the south end, 10,000, and then, about 3,000 on Union and Pickens Street. That's, pretty close to the numbers that we see coming down 2-lane Monroe Avenue every day. So obviously this road was, way overbuilt for what was needed. It had structural issues. There were, geometric deficiencies, safety concerns, all the things, you can see there. And it certainly depressed the land values adjacent to the road. And you can see how, that was a bridge under Broad Street with the crates underneath it, holding it up. Some of that we were hoping that this project would get funded, and that that's why we took that measure. We didn't want the state rehabbing the bridge, and then 5 years later we'd be tearing it down. So about the 80s, we started talking, and there was a bunch of studies that were done and had visions of removing all or part of the inner loop. This section, this inner loop east, was always part of those because it was, the traffic levels were so low on it. And you can see, all the studies that were done there. The design center had a charrette in 2007, which is, I was at the city at that time, and it was a great process to kind of, get some ideas about, what that was, what that would look like. And it made the two of the city vision plan and the, as important, the Density Transportation Council long range transportation plan, which always is needed to get funding when you have a state project. Scoping documents were completed in 2013 and had made that recommendation as well. So why do we want to take it down? Pretty obvious reasons and placemaking reasons: reconnect neighborhoods with the center city, create a mixed use infill development site, enhance a pike bed environment, improve livability, and try and remedy a mistake of the urban renewal area, and then in this case, right size the overbuilt infrastructure. As we've talked about, it was just way too much road for the traffic. So in comes the Tiger Grant, and as part of that, we did some benefit cost analysis, which was required to get Tiger funding. And you can see what the benefits were there. The using the federal discount rate, you had to get to a number close to 2. We got there, and so it was thought possible to move ahead and get Tiger funding for it. It took us 3 times to get the funding. We worked with Stantec to help us refine. They were the folks who had put the design plan together, and we worked with them to define our application a little bit better based on feedback from USDOT. And we requested $17.7 million for that project. We found out on August 30th, 2013, which I believe is Eric Frisch's birthday, which is important for you all to know. He's coming up to talk about it, Loop North next. And it was the 3rd largest grant given during that Tiger 2013 cycle. The downside, as far as public engagement and all of that, is that the funds had to be obligated in 2014. So this is 8 months we had to typically do the work that is required, that DOT allows, or pretty much requires based on their program, 2 years to complete. So we were under the gun from the beginning to get the public process going so we could have a full and open process. So what did we do? We had over 50 public meetings in the 8 months. We had major meetings at the library and Martin Luther King Park, brainstorming kind of things. They drew anywhere from 20 to 100 people to those. We had several meetings and many conversations with the design center, and that, you know, we and the design team at Stantec found that very helpful. We work with the Upper and Lower East Ave and Monroe Ave business groups, neighborhood groups, you know, listed there. One important change that came out of meeting with the Richmond Street group, they were concerned that Richmond Street's up near where we have a what is, you know, was going to be and is a new entrance to the inner loop. They were right across from that, and they thought people would get off the inner loop, come across to Richmond Street, and shortcut to Alexander that way. So we changed the design of that street not to make it look like a street, a typical street with sidewalks at the same grade as the road. We made it look more like a driveway with a raised sidewalk and no curb around it, you know, to define it as a street. And I think the neighborhood was happy with that, and it really does help change the just a visual cue helps to keep people from, you know, maybe seeing that as a street and using it as a cut through. So you know, I think the lessons learned here was not only was it, you know, it was tough for us because of the time frame we had, but I think just in general, some residents are hard to, you know, to engage due to their, you know, busy lives and methods of public outreach. An advantage that Interloop North has, and I'm sure one that Eric's going to talk about, is that there's more time for a more robust approach to civic engagement. So we had a concept that we started with after the first couple of meetings, which talked about, you know, those things on the right that, you know, we thought were all, you know, related to placemaking: the wide sidewalks, the bike lanes, and wide sidewalks on both sides of the street. We decided early on to, you know, use the existing street of Union Street as the base for this replacement, because there was already, you know, still a neighborhood, you know, left on that side. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't build this big new thing with new buildings proposed on the north side and still, you know, and still have, you know, the south side looking like, you know, the lost stepchild. And so wide sidewalks on both street. We were talking about bike lanes, wanted to make sure there was plenty of off-street parking, you know, 3 to 5 travel lanes, landscape medians, all of those kind of context sensitive, you know, design features for an urban street. And we wanted to make sure that Union Street was two-way all the way from Monroe to Main Street. We definitely wanted to make that connection, you know, a two-way connection, and, you know, keep that as a two-way connection to make the city flow better. So the final design, we, you know, kept most of those, many of those things. Two-way, you know, cycle track was added because there was a lot of input from, you know, the bike folks about, gee, this would be a great place to do it. We have the space to do it. All of those kind of things. We reconnected all the city streets. I think, you know, talking to the folks at Stantec and, you know, the folks at the city who worked on the project, I think if we had a do-over, seeing how it runs, and this is certainly something that, you know, could happen in the future, we would like to have seen this cross-section. We would have liked to have had the island still in there. The elimination of, or the median, the elimination of the median was, you know, replaced with a 3-lane section. And this was thought that it would allow, you know, turns. I guess, you know, the reality in hindsight is, and, you know, we talked about this back and forth, is that only Gardner Park, you know, in this section provides connectivity to another street. Many of the streets along that section, you know, are dead ends. So providing that, you know, turning lane could have been, you know, I think could have been done another way. We can still do that. Certainly no reason why we can't, but funding is always difficult for redos of these kind of projects. So here's the inner loop during construction. Construction went well. We had the benefit of Union and Pickens Street through the whole construction period. So, you know, we didn't really disrupt business or traffic too much to put it in. And as you saw, there wasn't much traffic on it in the first place. And here's the inner loop east today. Well, actually, probably a couple months ago, because the inner loop east today, there are more buildings going up. And those are seen here are some of the new buildings that are completed. The corner at the top left, the corner of Charlotte and Union, and at the corner of Broad and Union on the lower photo, and then the existing Rock City Brewing, which has nice parking in front of it, and people can access it from both directions, which is great. So what happened then? You know, we did this thing, we freed up 7 acres of land. You know, when does the placemaking kind of things, the building and the street infrastructure that happens, what, you know, how does that, you know, how does that happen? So land use and design studies were done. Public meetings were held on development goals. First RFPs went out in 2016. First building permit was issued in 2018. We had a complicated land acquisition from the state back in the late 40s. The state and the city partnered and bought the land jointly. And so you would think that it would be easy just to for the state to turn that over to us, or us to, you know, work some kind of deal out. But the survey design and money that had to change hands for that to happen was a large effort. But you know, the development wasn't going to happen until we could do that. So we were, the city was very energized to get that done. And then first certificate of occupancy was issued in late 2019, and all of the parcels along that stretch are spoken for. So that's great. And so here's the pretty pictures that the developers, you know, submitted, and I guess for the most part, looking and you know, most of these have been built except the one on the lower right has not you know, started as yet. That's the parcel at on East Avenue and Union on the northeast corner. But the other buildings have started, and here's a couple of photos of some townhouses, the extension of those ones you saw in the earlier photo, and a development on the other corner of East Avenue that is going up. That is, you know, going to be a great development. And then up on the left side, it's important to note that the Strong Museum took the impending project back in 2013 to heart. And through the work of their CEO, Raleigh Adams, and CJS Architecture, they decided to develop a master plan. I think they were just happy to go along with a 600 space flat parking spot in front of their building, which kind of was a buffer for them for the inner loop. But once they realized a row was going in, and you know, I really give them credit, they went ahead, they did this master plan, and that resulted in the recently completed Lego themed parking structure on the above left, which made space for hotel, that row housing you see in the bottom, and also is going to line up with their continued development of more museum space and some amenities like less restaurants and those things on the campus of the museum, to the Strong Museum, just to you know, make that truly a destination, and will really cement the placemaking along the street. So there was $229 million in private development. The investment in the inner loop all in was under 30 million. So great return on investment for the city. 152,000 square feet of commercial space, 534 housing units, 170 permanent jobs, pretty good numbers for a development. And we're, the city was pretty excited to see that happen. There was concern at the time that between Midtown and the Inner Loop that we wouldn't find developers to develop their those kind of things. And so it was great to see this placemaking, along here and the development happen, even with the abundance of land and within the former Inner Loop area. Want to talk a little bit, because I think it goes along with placemaking and certainly leads into what we're talking about and what Eric will talk about Inner Loop 2. And I want to thank Brett Garwood for this information. I think there's this narrative about housing that any housing downtown is unaffordable. These are the numbers for home leasings options, which was a couple of those buildings I showed you, along with their Charlotte townhomes and some housing they have just off the loop up Charlotte Street, and it kind of shows the affordable numbers for just their housing. I think it's impressive that we're seeing this affordability right within the downtown area and walking distance to where a lot of the jobs are. Brett had also reached out and talked to the other housing developers, and when you count all the project in the loop, which is close to 600,000 housing units, a third of those units will be affordable to low-income households earning 60% of the AMI, area median income. 30 of the units are affordable for folks making between 60 and 100%. 20% of those are going to be, somebody who works and earns, under $12.50 an hour is going to be able to afford 20% of these houses. And the rents are going to range between $450 to $3,000 per month. And 55 of those units are supported by housing for the formerly homeless or have, project-based subsidy. Certainly, we'd all like to see more affordable units for the people, for those folks who are under 30% AMI. And there is, some of this obviously along the Inner Loop corridor, and then Conifer's project at Southeast Towers will solidify that housing and maintain its affordability, that redo of that housing project, which had really fallen into disrepair. But new housing, the real challenge for all of us is new housing for people under 30% of AMI is difficult to do without a rental subsidy, and it's something the industry and government need to partner with if we're going to make it happen. I think it's certainly important, but I think the Inner Loop East has shown, and I'd argue that there are not many places more integrated by socioeconomic strata than this stretch of the Inner Loop based on these numbers. So this is my contact information. I would be I'll be available afterwards, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And I am now going to turn the screen over to Eric, and he's going to talk about the upcoming Inner Loop North project. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for the presentation on Inner Loop East and a few of the nice things you said about me in the middle of there. I'm coming to you live from my office, which is exciting, being able to come back to the office every once in a while, although strange to talk to 200 people from this confined space. But really extremely proud of the work that we've been able to achieve with Inner Loop East. It was a labor of love for myself and many others, to be sure. We're creating jobs, adding vibrancy, putting Rochester really at the forefront of the highway removal movement. And we're setting the stage for similar work in other cities as well as right here in Rochester, which is why I'm so excited to be a project manager for the Inner Loop North Transformation Planning Study. Again, I'm Eric Frisch. I'm manager of special projects for the City of Rochester in the Department of Environmental Services and the Engineering Bureau. I am a trained transportation planner by trade. and was heavily involved in the Interloop East project. This is a, hold on a second. This is a quick outline of what I'll be discussing today. So I'll go through an overview of the project, discuss the team, review the community engagement plan, schedule and scope of work, and then I'll end with some conceptual, highly conceptual visions for perhaps what could be in the corridor as developed by our consultant team early on. So when I say Interloop North, where am I referring to? I am referring to the entire remaining section of the Interloop East or Interloop Expressway, from its new terminus at North Union Street, all the way around to its interchange with 490 over by Frontier Field. Keep in mind, although the city is leading this effort, the expressway, its ramps, and a lot of the other infrastructure that you see out there is owned, operated, and maintained by New York State. And New York State is an integral partner in this effort. This is another way of looking at it. The corridor itself, the expressway, is shown there in the dashed green line, while the crossing points between north and south are shown in yellow, demonstrating how the expressway bifurcates the city, separating downtown from neighborhoods and places to the north. Keep in mind that this is a planning study, the Interloop North Transformation Planning Study. It's a $1 million planning study, but it's a planning study nonetheless. The funds were secured by Assemblymember Gant a few years back, and the project has been underway. Hard to believe now it's been underway for what, 9 months. This is not a design project at this time, right? It will result, think of it as an alternatives analysis. It will result in a preferred alternative or alternatives that can be advanced to design. There are no commitments. There is no presupposed outcome at this time. The most important component is to listen to and work with the community through robust public engagement. Goals of the project are to reconnect neighborhoods, just like we did with Interloop East, and making it easier for bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users to navigate our streets and better connect across the city and between neighborhoods. I want to restore a human-scaled street grid. Human scale is important, right? We want to design for people, not for cars. We want to create a sense of place. That is what our Rochester 2034 comprehensive plan is all about, right? Placemaking. We see this project as critical to that effort. Want to integrate with Rock the Riverway, our other major investment program that we have going on. You may not realize this, but the Interloop does cross the river, right? You may not notice it as you barrel across the expressway at whatever speed you're comfortable going at, but it does, and that expressway bridge does form a formidable barrier between downtown and High Falls, and makes it difficult for us to complete the Riverway Trail system along the river. We, of course, are creating new opportunities for economic development, new opportunities for all types of housing developments, like Jim mentioned with Interloop East. There's a lot of more than 50% of the units are affordable or otherwise supportive housing. We look to see that happen here as well. So that we're creating a place that works for all of our residents here in the city. And we recognize, of course, there are people who live and work in this area today. And we want to make sure that whatever we do here supports them and discourages displacement, minimizes that by coming up with strategies to ensure that people can live and work in the neighborhood. Although it's a City of Rochester project, it is led by a consultant team. We have engaged the services of Bergman Associates as lead consultant. They are being assisted by Kimley Horn, Trowbridge Wolf Michaels Landscape Architects, SAA EBI, Lou Engineers, and RIT Center for Urban Entrepreneurship, all assisting Bergman with different specialized skills for delivering this project. Central to this project is the community engagement strategy. What you see here, this is the intent of what we're scoped to do. Obviously, conducting public engagement in the midst of a pandemic is a bit challenging, to say the least. We are active online and on social media. We have obviously not been able to get out and do the pop-up events and public meetings and other things at this time that we had hoped to achieve by now. Obvious reasons why we've been unable to do that. However, we are making plans to get out there now that our area has been approved for gatherings of up to 50 people, I believe. So we're making plans for some small group type of events in the very near future, so that we can start moving our engagement strategy forward. A project as large and complex as this requires technical expertise, of course, so a technical advisory committee has been convened. Involves representatives from multiple city departments and Monroe County departments, New York State Department of Transportation, RGRTA, Genesee Transportation Council, and others to provide direction, technical feedback, review the various materials that are developed over the course of a project like this, consider public input that we receive over the course of the project, and assess the various alternatives, ultimately leading to the preferred alternative or alternatives that we conclude with. We've also convened a community advisory committee with over 40 stakeholders from the project area, including residents, property owners, business leaders, advocates, institutions, etc. The goal is for the Community Advisory Committee to help build trust in and support for the project. And the Advisory Committee will provide its perspective on the various alternatives that are developed, the recommendations that are pursued, as well as helping to promote the engagement in the community. We want to make sure that we reach all corners of our community and get the most possible voices heard as part of this project. Also important to note that 2 members of the Community Advisory Committee are sitting on the Technical Advisory Committee. So there's a feedback loop between the technical and community advisory committees. And an interesting early outcome of the Community Advisory Committee is the formation of a racial equity subcommittee, which was actually proposed by 2 of our Community Advisory Committee members. The subcommittee will lead the creation of a racial equity impact analysis for the Inner Loop North, recognizing the traumatic history of the construction of the facility as it is today, and others like it, of course, all around the country, with a goal of healing wounds and ensuring that history does not repeat itself as we proceed with whatever outcomes we look to advance as part of Inner Loop North. Again, we're active online. We have a website, innerloopnorth.com. There is an online survey there. Feel free to check it out. That would be great. We're also active on social media. Those are the various handles. And so we are doing some outreach as a result of that. The project schedule is shown here. Obviously, it's been pushed a little bit, affected a little bit by the pandemic. But we're going to get back on track real soon. We haven't obviously been able to collect data in the way that we had hoped to with the changes to travel patterns as the pandemic kicked off. But things are stabilizing, and it looks like we're going to be able to begin to collect that data once school gets back in session, if school gets back in session, in the very near future. So we'll also be able to begin, like I said, conducting public engagement on a more face-to-face basis. We're now looking at a fall 2021 completion. And again, completion means that we will have a preferred alternative or alternatives to then advance to the formal scoping and design process. This is the general scope of work. I'm briefly going to describe this. I want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the time here. But the first step is to understand how things are today. So we're going to look at land use and zoning, traffic data, structural conditions, environmental conditions, etc., that exist today. So we get an idea of how things are as they currently are, so that when we go and we look at choosing alternatives, we can then benchmark against what exists today, and we can forecast out to what we may be experiencing in the future. Some examples. This is current estimated traffic volumes in the corridor. So you can see going from east to west, traffic picks up substantially as you move from east to west. Again, these are estimated volumes or the most recent actual counts. These are not counts that we conducted directly as part of this project because we haven't been able to do that yet. So this project will do in-field data collection, which will then obviously revise this. But this gives you a good idea of what's out there today. Also, we've been able to analyze crash data. So this is a heat map indicating, I believe it's for the last 5 years, most recent 5 years of reported crashes, demonstrating two, I'd say, hot spots, both very near each other, one being the bridge over the river where there's a lot of merge and weave, short distance and high speeds, a lot of complex movements, let's say, taking place, as well as in the vicinity of the State Street on and off ramps and Allen Street. And of course, where there's less traffic, there's likely to be fewer crashes. And so as you go to the east, we're not seeing, although there are crashes, you're not seeing that cluster that's occurred in those two locations. Since one of our primary goals of the project is to improve conditions for bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit users, a thorough multimodal accessibility analysis will be conducted that will help us to propose alternatives to achieve the goal of multimodal accessibility. So this slide gives you an idea of what we'll be looking at. One example, as shown here, this is the bicycle level of traffic stress in the project area. Red means lower comfort for bicyclists, and green being high comfort for bicyclists, and that's based on a number of factors. But this gives you an idea of what we'll be looking at as part of the multimodal analysis for the project. Jim mentioned about Interloop East. A market analysis will be doing the same type of work as part of this. The market study will inform the scale and type of development that could occur if and when the project moves forward. I'll note that the market study that was completed for Interloop East turned out to be extremely accurate. I think that the overall sort of scale and density of development that we're currently seeing out there is consistent with the market study that was produced for that project at that time. It's really helpful for us to get an idea and to plan ahead for what could be. So we're really it's great to see that work was such a success. The market analysis then leads directly into a benefit cost analysis, which seeks to answer the question: will the project benefits justify and exceed the project costs? It's a federal requirement now for any competitive federal transportation investment programs. It was a hugely important factor in our successful award of federal funding through the Tiger program for Interloop East. That project, as you saw earlier, had a roughly 2 to greater than 2 to 1 benefit cost ratio. And I think actually, if you look at the numbers today, it's even higher than that based on actual project costs and actual benefits seen just so far. But that's just me pontificating. Don't quote me on that. Lastly, after we analyze alternatives and select a preferred alternative, we'll need to look at how are we actually going to implement this project. Will it be phased? What agencies are going to take what responsibilities? What are the most relevant fund sources, and how best do we approach those fund sources? But hopefully it doesn't take us 25 years to deliver whatever vision is ultimately chosen, as the Interloop East kind of sort of was. And so I thought I'd close with some high-level concept visions. As I said earlier, these were produced early on by the consultant team. These are not actual proposals. They have not been evaluated against actual data, but they are great ways to get us thinking about what could be in the corridor, looking at some potential areas, some areas along the corridor, and just what are some ideas and what would that look like and feel like. So this is a picture of the Interloop Bridge over the river, the Central Avenue Dam right immediately adjacent to it. Maybe there's a way you can bring the street more up, the bridge more up to an expressway to a more of a street scale, provide a two-way bike facility, maybe better as a street connection. Then you can interconnect with the street grid, as you'll see over to the west there. You kind of see where Mill Street comes in. That's one example. There's another example. Maybe there's a short tunnel section. And doing so would enable us to reconnect other streets and create a further development along the corridor. Again, not an actual proposal at this time, just things to get you thinking about what could be. What if the bridge, no matter whether it's rebuilt or otherwise, but if it were raised, would we be able to, if the bridge were elevated, would we be able to complete the trail system, put it right underneath and directly connect into High Falls through there? Wouldn't ultimately look exactly like this because we've got the Central Avenue Dam right there and need to preserve that. But this again gives you an idea of what could be. Over by Schiller Park, or formerly known as Franklin Square, kind of a moribund park next to a reclaimed brownfield site and adjacent to this expressway. Well, if we eliminate the expressway and we've cleaned up the properties immediately to the west, which we are in the process of doing, maybe we can not only reconnect the street grid, we can expand that park and develop mixed-use properties that frame that park space, as well as address the street, creating a much more rich urban environment through here. It's another view of what could be in that area. Again, you would say this is Cumberland Street, right? And another would be over by World of Inquiry School. The school does not have playing fields. It's hemmed in by the inner loop and by the surrounding street network. But if the expressway came out here, maybe they could have playing fields and green space that could also be actively used by the community as well. So those are just some examples of things that maybe we could look at. Again, nothing that's set in stone, but all things that we can look at. So that is my presentation. I look forward to your questions later. I'm now going to turn things over to Professor Norman Garrett.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here again. Well, actually, I wish I could be there in person. I really enjoy my visits to Rochester. I wanted to start out with this picture because it's, to me, when we're talking about placemaking, is one of the most extraordinary things that I came away from Rochester with, was the idea of a falls right in the middle of the city, and yet I'd never heard about it. And so in thinking about placemaking, I think this is really an important place to start thinking about what that means, thinking about how you can make something like this the centerpiece of your city and go from there. So talk about what is important in the city, what type of city you want, and how do you highlight things that are important in the city. Very few cities have an amenity like this. So around 2014, 2015, I made three different trips to Rochester to give talks. And I was so excited when on one of the trips I saw the mud being taken from the lake and being dumped on the freeway. And I got really excited and I went back and I wrote this article for City Lab. And it became, for weeks, the top read article in City Lab at a time. And it's interesting for that because it really shows the national interest in what is being done in Rochester and the national interest in this issue of freeway teardown. And this is represented by this report from the Congress for New Urbanism, which each year puts out Freeways Without Future, Freeways Without Futures, and they get up to 60 or 70 entrants from around the country trying to get on this list. The thing about Rochester is that there are lots and lots of people talking about removing freeways. You have actually done it, and that's why this is so exciting. So to take a quote from Freeways Without Futures document, this is what they said we are trying to achieve. We need to stop continuing to funnel taxpayers' dollars into an aging system that pollutes cities, divide neighborhoods, occupy valuable land that could be used for homes, businesses, etc. We need to look at alternative solutions, and that's exactly what we're here for. We need to create stronger cities and communities. So that's our task. How do we go about creating stronger cities and towns in our country? How do we go away from the disastrous experimentation of the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s to start creating places that people can love and live and have a high quality of life in again. People tend to disparage urban planning. They'll say things like it's not rocket science. And I tend to disagree with that statement. For one, this is the science fiction view of what city planning should look like. During the pandemic, I've been watching a lot of Star Trek and Star Trek Picard. And every time they show Starfleet Enterprise, I start to get so angry, and my husband says, calm down and focus on the story. But this is the idea of city planning that is being put forward. But the point I want to make is that we probably don't want rocket scientists to be making our cities, yet we also need to recognize that city planning is very complex. And this is probably why we are in the strait that we are in right now. So I think it's really important to understand why you have been able to make progress in Rochester in moving forward. And one of the reasons is I would credit the design center. There are not many cities in the country that has been able to get such an elevated discussion going about urban planning. And that comes from having a center such as the Design Center, which brings in expertise in all the different areas that must come together in this very complex field of endeavor. But now I'm seeing the coordination between the Design Center and some of the advocate groups like this, the 4C, our C4 group and the Hinge group. And so this is a really exciting endeavor to be part of, and I'm really glad to be have been invited to share my perspective. So where I want to start within my presentation is going back to Jane Jacobs, and in her last book, which she wrote at the age of 90 plus, she reminded us about the danger of amnesia. And she said that even the memory of what was lost is lost. So in terms of rebuilding our cities and towns, we need to understand and recapture some of that memory so that we can continue to build on that lost knowledge to create cities for the future, but that has a continuity with the past that has been lost in what we have done over the last, well, 50 years in extensively, but 100 years on a smaller scale. So I use these maps all over the country, and I ask people, what city is this? And of course, you all know what city is this. This is the city of Rochester. And this is the frame on which this city flourished for well over 100 years. This is what it looked like in 1898. 1951, you see more or less the same structure, the same street grid, the same pattern of housing, of in the surrounding neighborhoods, in the downtown, etc. Something radically different happened in the 1960s. We went from a city that looked like this to a city that looked like this. And we don't really stop to think how radical this change was and how it changed not only how people got around, but also the very nature of how people lived and worked and enjoyed this city. Everything changed. And not only did everything change, but it was basically, this is what happened in the 60s. And for 50 years, we had to live with this pattern. Now we are beginning to see how we can change this pattern. But I think it's really important to understand that it's not just the transportation system that we're changing. We're changing the very nature of the city. We're trying to get back to a more human-oriented city. So as we talk about these changing, we can't just think about it in transportation terms. We need to think about how the city is going to look in the future. What type of city do we want to look in the future? And how whatever is done now interfaces with what our vision of that future looks like. So to show this, the continuity of what happened in the 60s, this was Rochester in 2012. I have not done this kind of modeling for Rochester, but I have done some modeling of how a similar city in Connecticut has evolved over the last 100 years. This was done by one of my grad students a few years ago, and this shows the city of Bridgeport. And if I do this presentation in Bridgeport, nobody recognizes. This is Bridgeport in 1913. This is Bridgeport now. It's hard to recognize that this is the same place. And we can see a lot of the damages that was done. For example, this was a city that could pay its way. Most of the buildings you saw here were taxpayers. In this picture, the only taxpayers are the buildings in blue. So no wonder the city goes bankrupt. Everything else is on the dole in this city. So this is what we have created. 62% of the land area in this city is devoted to car storage or car movement. Rochester is not much different from this, and the transition that went on in Rochester is not much different from what you see here. So what we're trying to do is to get back to a city that is more functioning than what we have created. Another set of statistics that, again, I haven't done are seeing numbers for Rochester. This is from Buffalo, New York, and in orange is the extent of the Buffalo metropolitan area in 1950. In red is the extent of the urbanized area in 2000. And you would think that with this explosion in land being used for the city, you would think would have been a corresponding explosion in population. This is what has actually happened in Buffalo. That's the increase in land. That's the increase in population, or lack of increase in population. I am virtually sure that a similar analysis of Rochester would show exactly the same thing. This is the definition of a stagnant place, a place that is past its glory, but that doesn't mean that a new day of glory could not come. In addition to what happened with the entire metropolitan area, this is what happened with the city of Buffalo. Population went from 600,000 to just over 200,000 right now. So we had an explosion of the metropolitan area without an explosion in population, and we had an implosion of the city. So basically we were moving people from the city of Buffalo out into the surrounding areas. And why this is a disaster, why this is a problem, I'll just ask you to think on this map, the area in which you live, and think of the cities that are and regions that are doing well. And think of those cities, think of places like Chicago, Toronto, Burlington, places like that. Those are all places that have strong inner cities. If we are going to have these northern tier New York cities come out of the doldrum, we have to find some way of restoring the character, the vibrancy of the central city. It's not going to happen with continued growth only in the suburb. So we're talking about change, and cities can change. We think about the Buffalo or the Rochester or the Syracuse that we know now, and it's one thing. We think about what it was 60, 70 years ago, but I want to give an alternative, a different type of city, a different type of change, one that changed from car culture into something else. You might not recognize this city even if you know it, because you don't expect to see a street scene like this in a city like Amsterdam. But this is what Amsterdam looked like in the 1960s, when their equivalent of Bartholomew, an American planner, came and said, you had to take down this amount of the city to build freeways. And they decided to go in a different direction. And this street looks like this today. An absolutely transformational transformation of the place, of how people use the place, of people's quality of life, etc. Amsterdam has gotten to the stage where now they're turning streets that what we would call multimodal streets, bikes, pedestrians, etc. They're getting rid of cars on those streets. This is a 50-year evolution, but this is what they're doing now in Amsterdam. Another city that I'm very familiar with, in fact, I live here part-time, is Zurich, Switzerland, which went through more or less the same kind of transformation. This is what their main area around their train station looked like, was choked with cars. It was a city that built, most places build highways next to rivers. They actually built their highway in the river to show just how much they had gone in the direction of auto dependency. Today, it's a city that is ruled by public transit. Again, they made decisions in the 1970s to change the direction that they wanted the city, they wanted to see their city move into. And some of the implication of that, one of the big implications has to do with people being killed on our city streets. In Amsterdam, the chance of being killed by a car if you were a pedestrian was 2 times the rate in the US in 1975. Today, the difference is a 20-fold difference between the US and the Netherlands. So just to show one impact of this change that this city underwent. Just one example from Zurich. The cost of transportation, the average cost of transportation in the US is about $9,000. In Zurich, a very, very rich, wealthy city, much better transportation system based on the tram, $4,000 per year is about what you would spend for transportation. So we need change. And I am really excited to see this discussion about the North Loop, discussing the issue of going back to the street grid. And this is really the way to go, but it's also a difficult issue because how we create street grids, we knew how to do it 200 years ago. It's never taught in schools these days. So it's going to be really difficult to really do it right, but it's exactly what is needed today. So as a start, we can learn from the past. This is what we had. This is the inner loop, and this is my my understanding. I guess my line should have continued. My yellow line should have continued further to the west. But this is my understanding of the project. This was built with the idea that we were going to concentrate traffic. That is what freeway building was about, that you would concentrate traffic. I can't tell how many times I've gone to cities around the country. I've gone to LA, and most of the grid is empty of traffic. All the traffic is on those roads that lead from the freeway to the garages. This is what freeway building was about. and it was a misunderstanding of how traffic worked. So it was about concentration. What we see with a pattern prior to 1950s was that traffic was diffused. We use the sense of diffusion. And it's important to have traffic diffused through the street network, because from an economic and economic point of view, we need traffic on those commercial streets where there are businesses. We need foot traffic, we need car traffic. What we have done with the freeway building is that we have concentrated the traffic onto the freeways and just onto those streets that lead to parking garages, and it starves other streets of traffic, of the lifeblood that they need to survive. What I'm hoping with this project that we will see is a going back to the grid. And I mean that in every way, in that we don't need to have a replacement for the inner loop. Once we get rid of the inner loop, the traffic that used to be on the inner loop is just going to disappear into the grid. So we need to start from that perspective, that we are using network thinking for this project. The only reason why would we building a new replacement for facility is that if we think that people's main travel goal is to go from one red point to the other red point, which is not the case. The reason why they do that now is because of how the system is set up. We're setting up a totally different approach to travel and behavior in the city. So I think that's really important. And I would end by saying what we really need to be focusing on is not focusing on the corridor and as a replacement corridor of movement, albeit a somewhat better one. But what we need to be doing is focusing on placemaking and looking at the grid, looking at how we can use the grid to do what we need to do in terms of the type of living, the type of commerce, the type of civic engagement, the type of parks, etc. So really, this should be a project about placemaking first and foremost, and not about corridors for movement. So that's all I have for you. And I just leave you with this statement from the 1960s, where Louis Mumford reminds us that a city exists not for the constant passage of motor cars, but for the care and culture of man. And I think that needs to infuse anything we do in this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norm. That was a great segue into our Q&A session. I will start first with a general question as we welcome our panelists back. We know that the Tiger Grant, the goal of the original Tiger Grant, when it was first made available, was particularly to reknit the fabric of the city. That was, I don't know if it's a phrase that we came up with or that was a language that was in the Tiger Grant, but we understood that the project was about reknitting that fabric, all those streets that were cut and terminated as a result of the digging of the inner loop. And one of the most significant, immediately impactful benefits was exactly that. I'll never forget the first time I crossed I went on the surface road connection on Charlotte Street and rediscovered the continuation of that street, that it actually had two sides that were never experienced together. And then that became commonplace. We very quickly adapted to being able to cross the moat on these surface roadways, and we discovered these new pockets. So with your comment about placemaking and understanding that the inner loop east was the first phase of this transition from this auto-dependent roadway that, you know, that we had to what we now have, which is a wonderful street that perhaps could be made better, but certainly is a huge improvement. Now we can take what we've learned from that and apply it to the northern section. So I know there have been a lot of questions regarding access to green space, which was not a big part of the Inner Loop East. Diversity, there's a lot of questions regarding will other services be available other than just housing. So can Eric and Jim and then Norm respond to what have we learned from Inner Loop East that we can improve upon in Inner Loop North?
One thing that we learned, and maybe it doesn't exactly directly answer your question, but it's that we can deliver projects like this. You know, we can do this as a community. You know, we did something pretty special here, and we should definitely take the time to pat ourselves on the back for that. As far as the street, you know, the street ultimately that was built, that was what was going to be accepted by those who you know, owned and operated the expressway, and those who were going to be helping to pay for it. I'd like to think that, you know, we can look at things once the developments are in place and make the case for modifications in the future. It's definitely something, you know, we do have the benefit of hindsight. We can learn from the experiences with Inner Loop East, both process-wise, but also design-wise. So, you know, maybe we have additional backing that we can point to and say, you know, we were told this last time around, and here's what came out of Inner Loop East, and we'd like to push a little harder on this particular point. And I won't mention any of those particular points. I think we all know what they could be. But of course, you know, we don't know what the alternatives are. We don't know, as Professor Garrick said, maybe there is no street that's provided. You know, we're not just replacing it with something new, but rethinking the corridor entirely. We don't know. All options are on the table. So what we do know is we want walkability, bikeability, accessibility, equitable, and balance. So those are the goals going forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the advantages that we didn't have with Inner Loop East is that the other, you know, pieces of urban renewal kind of took away the rest of the street grid, you know, north of the Inner Loop, north of Union Street, you know, to the space where, you know, the design center was, and, you know, Manhattan Square and those apartments. So, you know, there really wasn't much, you know, opportunity to put a street grid back there because it was filled in, you know, by buildings that were placed in other neighborhoods that got destroyed, you know, through urban renewal. Not the case, you know, in the Inner Loop North. So there are some opportunities there to, you know, to do that, you know, the opportunity to do that a little more robustly and establish, you know, that prior grid that was there. You know, in the end, it has to make sense. And that's always the challenge in, you know, on the transportation side. And as Norm said, you know, using, you know, the dispersion and, you know, how will that work? But I think the other question, you know, in this COVID time is what is, you know, we're struggling to get out there and take the traffic counts because, you know, the traffic is not, you know, like it's going to be. And you know, speaking with Eric, and I was speaking with Jim Hoffman from Stantec as well. You know, if people are going to be working 3 and 4 days a week in the office and 1 day from home, what, you know, we have all these factors to design for, you know, level of service and all this other kind of stuff. Where people are only driving, you know, in a couple of days a week, and it's not the same couple of days, you know, the peaks are going to be less. And so, you know, the need for those, you know, for the capacity of those streets, you know, it's a challenging time for transportation engineers to figure that out, because if they, but I also think it's an opportunity to, you know, to do some of the things that Norm had talked about.
I want to build on that point that you both made. So much has changed since the beginning of this project. I remember when the Inner Loop East project started, the mayor was brand new. She was newly elected. And she presented this project to the Council of Mayors, which received, great interest. But, the mindset of where we were then to how much has happened in that kind of what I could say short period of time, because the whole country, the whole world has kind of woken up to this notion of walkability, multimodal streets. That's what brings vibrancy to communities and neighborhoods rather than the car. So even though we're a car dependent culture, what will help push us to be less car dependent and embrace perhaps these changes? And we're seeing that happen all over. I shared with everyone the link of the Freeways to Nowheres, the Freeways Without Futures that CNU has a program going on. And New York State is leading the charge with 3 cities that are undergoing major projects: the Skyway in Buffalo, of course, the Inner Loop in Rochester, and the I-81 project in Syracuse. Can you tell us, Norm, maybe a little bit more? You shared a little bit about worldwide how this shift has impacted, cities, and your maps were very compelling when you see the difference between what cities were like before and then how they were kind of disseminated with the road construction. Can you tell us a little bit more of other incentives that we as a community would have to be less car dependent?
But before I go there, I just want to echo what Eric said about learning from the Inner Loop East. And I think you can push that even further. I think that road is really amazingly wide for the traffic volumes that we talked about. And I know the reason for it. It's LOS, it's projecting traffic, it's all of those things. And I think one of the things you can do to push back against these very damaging engineering matrices is to actually document what is actually happening there compared to what your models told you. So that when you come to negotiate with those people from Albany, you can say, this is what we did, this is what we experienced. So then maybe we should try a different way. It might work, it might not, but start with what you have. And I think that's a really exciting to have that. So what is that? I guess that answers part of the question, Maria, is that?
Yeah, well, I guess it's, it's kind of self-evident, especially with what you provided, to see, the vibrancy that we see on streets. And hopefully we'll be able to see that more in these new places that we're creating.
I think there is so much fear that is tied up with the idea of automobility. We fear that there's not going to be enough parking. We fear that people are going to get stuck in congestion. And those fear has led us to develop a set of matrices. For example, we have minimum parking requirements, which is part of the problem in Rochester. Buffalo has dealt with it. We have these LOS, level of service, absolute madness that determines how wide streets should be. So if we start pushing back on some of those things, and some of them are in your control, such as parking, some of them are in your control, such as what, again, Buffalo did in terms of the smart codes. Those are the type of things that you probably need to start thinking about in terms of changing and understanding that people can indeed walk. They do want to walk and they do want to bike. Some people will drive because that is what works for them, or physical needs or whatever, but not everybody wants to drive everywhere for everything. And that's how we have planned our society to behave.
Yeah, I would say we love the convenience of the car, and we've built a whole system to facilitate that. And it's hard to knock people for driving when other options aren't really readily available. So the hope, the new interest in multimodal street design is really inspiring. And as we develop those alternatives, then hopefully we can help change the culture to some degree. Now,
and just one other point I'm just going to make. I mean, most cities do not have the great inner city neighborhoods that Rochester have. And being able to connect those neighborhoods to the downtown and to each other and to the outlying neighborhood changes how people will see the cities. Right now, they're just pockets. So people drive out of those pockets, but they walk within the pockets.
Mhm. I have a question from Suzanne Mayer, and it's a common question because it deals with the regulations of how much of our street designs are dictated by engineers, police, emergency vehicles, and other things. So how, I think you kind of hinted at this, Norm, a little bit, but how can we make a case to these agencies that we can build a narrow street, a street that's more appropriate for human scale, but that will still not negatively impact the ability for these services to happen in the neighborhood?
That's very, very tough. In a lot of cities, the main designers of the street are the fire department. And they look at it from the one side, their response, but they don't look at it from the side that these wide streets are causing people to be killed. There are agencies now that are beginning to change. So maybe you need to invite some of those fire folks from other cities that have a more progressive attitude, and maybe starting that conversation is one way to go.
We've had some good conversations with the fire department, and we recognize that fire code is what it is, and it is a challenge. Our fire department is fairly flexible in some of the ways that we can approach how we design our streets to meet their needs while not sacrificing walkability. But as the professor says, it's a real challenge. You know, competing interests. We just completed, as part of our comprehensive access and mobility plan, we do have a section on emergency response and heavy vehicles and how to balance needs. So there are ways, but you know, if the question is how much of our street design is dictated by fire, by the need to serve large vehicles, quite a bit, as well as traffic engineering. But the field of traffic engineering is changing considerably as well, and projects like we've delivered are helping to further that conversation. So I think, you know, with the help of NACTO and other sort of groups that are pushing the envelope, we can point to examples from other cities or guidance that they've put out to say we want to pursue something like this in Rochester.
I know that the RTS has incorporated smaller vehicles, so there's been this willingness from some of these agencies to have a diversity of vehicle types that will then be able to be applied for the various needs. So that's certainly one very positive step. Going in a different direction, I want to talk a little bit about community engagement. Eric, you had mentioned a little bit of a kind of a schedule or a plan for engagement, but how exactly are you going to, Lisa Reagan has a question, how will you reach out to the community to have input into the planning during this COVID time when the community lacks access to things like the internet or smartphones?
Well, we have some good learning experiences. You know, the city's been delivering other projects throughout this pandemic, both design and construction-wise, and communicating with the public. It's definitely been a learning process for how best to achieve this. You know, so for instance, what we're on right now, Zoom, understood that you know, internet connection is required for actually, you know, being able to visualize the speakers or the presentations or the drawings or whatever. But you can, we can provide, you know, I think I was on East Main Street. We put boards up indicating what the design plans were out so the public could see them on site. And then people can always call in to a Zoom call and hear and communicate in that way. We also were accepting comments and questions in advance, so you know, you can call or write with your questions; they will be answered. And so coming up with new ways to engage the public. But we're also hopeful, now that we can have small gatherings, that we can begin to do some pop-up type of events, provided that we observe social distancing requirements. We think that we can do that in a safe way, and hopefully we get through this so that we can have some of our more traditional methods of engagement. But there are ways to use Zoom or other type of platforms similarly to reach the population.
I've been very, very pleased with the commitment to community engagement, and we understand with the Interloop East project that there was you reknit the fabric of some existing neighborhoods, but there was a lot of empty space that you were able to fill. But in this case, the Interloop North project is very important because it really needs to kind of knit together these two very disparate neighborhoods, one that is a very affluent downtown urban experience versus one that is very much in need of resources. And we have the opportunity to really build an amazing model of integrated housing, mixed use. So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the anchors that might exist in the neighborhood that will help facilitate the building of this new neighborhood?
Well, anchors in the neighborhoods, we have the new train station. I think there was a question in there somewhere. I was trying to peruse the questions a bit after my presentation about bringing the buses over, and that train station is designed such that there can be a later phase to make it a truly intermodal station and bring the intercity buses over from the temporary station across the street. That can be a real anchor for the community, especially if we as a nation ever invest in rail transportation like we probably should. The proximity to the public market and ways to better connect between the public market and downtown, I think, is huge. Obviously, the High Falls area, as the professor noted, it's a very unique and important location, and yet it's walled off from downtown. And so ways that we can better connect between High Falls and downtown provides opportunities as well. We don't know what the project is going to be, project, so it's hard for me to say, what types of buildings would be built or what services are going to be provided, how big are they going to be, and things like that. We don't know. I can't really answer them at this time, except to say that form is important. And as we reknit that fabric, if indeed we do remove the highway and reconnect, I think there's opportunities to do lots of things that are different from what we did before. Green space was definitely talked about in Interloop East. We encouraged private development to incorporate publicly accessible but privately maintained green space in their proposals. But so I can understand that some view that as a shortcoming. The great news is, depending on what ultimately comes out of Interloop North, we may have 20 plus acres of land to figure out what to do with, and it's a park poor area. There's a dearth of green space in that area. So, like I mentioned with World of Inquiry School and providing playing fields for the school, maybe there's a mix of playing fields and open space that's publicly accessible in that location. So.
Well, we've been so engaged in conversation here that we've lost track of time, but I am very pleased to say we had many, many questions, and I invite all of you to continue the conversation next week. So we'll get into that in a minute, but first I want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise, for sharing their time, and for being willing to meet with us again next week for an hour-long session to continue this conversation. So at this point, I'd like to pass it off to Jeremy Cooney, who's going to say a few words for C4.
Thanks so much, Maria. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the panelists. We talked about a lot of issues facing our center city, and there are a good number of us who live here. I'm coming to you live from my loft in downtown Rochester, proud to be part of the Washington Square Community Association. And I am here representing the group C4, which stands for Center City Community Coalition, one of the partners here. And we bring neighborhood voices of residents and business owners together to talk about quality of life issues and what it's like to inhabit this amazing downtown. So I just wanted to say thank you. I just dropped a link in the chat window for our Facebook page. We invite you to like that page and to follow along if you're interested in hearing about some of the upcoming activities. But we are just delighted to partner with the Community Design Center and all of these amazing panelists. By the way, many of you know I had the pleasure of serving as the Chief of Staff at the City of Rochester and got to work with both Jim and Eric, and their tremendous work just shows. I went for a walk this morning along the Inner Loop East, and it looks great, and I'm so proud and so excited of what Hinge and our neighbors are going to do to the north. So thanks so much from C4.
Thank you, Jeremy. And with that, I just want to again invite you to our follow-up question and answer session next week, 1-hour session. Please register for that. And we welcome our panelists back to engage in the continued conversation. There were many, many questions. This will give us an opportunity to kind of put the thematic questions together so that we can have a conversation without having to go specifically to each question. But with that, I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'd also like to invite you to our next Placemaking 101 presentation, which is scheduled for September 9th, which is titled Moving Rochester 2034 Forward. It's going to be featuring the City of Rochester Planning Department, talking about all of the different things that the city is doing to help implement Rochester 2034. So we look forward to that presentation. And following that, we're going to pick up on our rescheduled lecture presentations. So end of September, we have Bernice Rattle, who will be making her presentation remotely, but we look forward to hearing from her. We'll have more information about that on our website. So lots of things to look forward to. With that, I want to thank all of our sponsors for our lecture series. They support the work of the Community Design Center, and our work would not be possible without their support. So very, very grateful for that. And also to our circle of friends who are individuals or businesses who have made a commitment to sustaining support for the Design Center. If you value the work that we do, I invite you to join our circle of friends. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to joining you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.